In a matter of months, the executive branch mobilized a massive deportation and detention directive, aiming to scale up federal holding capacity and accelerate deportations with a speed rarely seen in modern federal logistics. But to execute a logistical operation of this scale, the administration must navigate a rigid architecture of existing laws enacted by Congress decades ago. These laws move slowly, and they do not change simply because a new administration issues an order. Across the country, federal appellate courts are basing their rulings on a strict reading of the law, reaffirming that a president cannot unilaterally rewrite statutory text. The primary tool individuals are using to force this judicial review is the writ of habeas corpus. In practice, a habeas corpus petition strips away bureaucratic delays. It forces the government to stand in front of a federal judge and provide a precise legal justification for holding a person without due process. Under this judicial scrutiny, the administration's legal defense was exposed. Their authority to hold people indefinitely without bond relied entirely on a radical reinterpretation of a single pre-existing immigration statute. This conflict functions as a mechanical stress test of the Constitution, determining whether the executive branch is strictly bound by the literal words passed by the legislative branch. To understand how this works, look at the case of Ricardo Aparecido Barbosa da Cunha. He is a Brazilian man who had resided in the United States for 2 decades. He is a homeowner, married, and raising 2 children. Last year, Barbosa da Cunha was apprehended by immigration agents deep inside the United States, far from any international border or port of entry. In court, the federal government explicitly conceded that he posed no risk of flight and absolutely no danger to his community. Despite those concessions, the government argued he was not entitled to a bond hearing. They claimed he was subject to mandatory bondless detention under their new policy framework. To justify stripping away his right to a hearing, the government cited authority from a congressional law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act. This diagram shows the phrase the government weaponized, seeking admission. Historically, this applied to individuals arriving at a border checkpoint. The executive branch stretched seeking admission retroactively. They argued because Barbosa entered decades ago, he was continuously seeking admission every single day. If courts accepted this reinterpretation, it would instantly legalize the mass detention of millions of domestic residents without any opportunity for judicial review or bond. The executive branch attempted to use a legal loophole. By taking a border-specific statute and applying it internally, they tried to bypass Congress to build the legal framework for a domestic mass detention apparatus. When Barbosa da Cunha's habeas corpus petition reached the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge Joseph Bianco authored the panel's decision. This stadium diagram outlines Judge Bianco's logic. A fan at the gate without a ticket is seeking admission. But if a fan sneaks in and is discovered sitting during the 7th inning, no reasonable interpretation categorizes them as seeking admission. They're already inside. The judge mapped this analogy directly to Barbosa da Cunha. A person who has resided inside the United States for decades, regardless of how they entered, cannot legally be categorized by the phrase seeking admission. Based on this strict textual reading, the court completely rejected the government's claim of mandatory detention power and ordered a bond hearing for Barbosa da Cunha. By adhering to the literal, plain-text meaning of the statute, the appellate court successfully neutralized a massive expansion of executive authority. This precise pattern of enforcing statutory text over executive ambition extends beyond individual detention rights in New York. It is systematically blocking federal operations in Washington, D.C. and across the states. In Washington, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed the administration's Day 1 proclamation designed to entirely shut down asylum processing at the border, which the government justified by citing a national invasion. The court ruled the proclamation unlawful. They stated a president cannot use that fabricated invasion pretext to wipe away asylum procedures explicitly enacted by Congress. This pushback is also blocking physical infrastructure. To hold thousands of detainees, ICE began rapidly purchasing massive industrial warehouses to convert into detention centers. In response, the Attorneys General of Arizona and Michigan filed lawsuits to halt the opening of these exact facilities in the cities of Surprise and Romulus. In the Arizona case, the state revealed the federal government quietly purchased a warehouse just 1 mile from a high school. Directly across the street sits a hazardous chemical plant storing thousands of gallons of chlorine and fluorine, a documented hazard zone. To fight back, the states utilized another congressional law, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. They pointed out that the executive branch completely bypassed the environmental and community impact reviews that NEPA legally requires before major federal actions. Whether defending a person's constitutional rights or protecting a residential community from a hazard zone, the judiciary and state attorneys general are using the executive's failure to follow statutory procedure as a definitive mechanism to stop these operations. However, this judicial pushback is not uniform across the United States. This map outlines a circuit split, occurring when federal appellate courts issue contradictory rulings on the exact same law. The 2nd and D.C. circuits struck down the administration's theories, while the 5th and 8th circuits fully upheld mandatory detention. The immediate real-world consequence is a fractured legal system. Right now, federal immigration law and basic human rights are applied differently depending solely on the state a person is arrested in. A federal statute cannot function legally if its interpretation changes across state lines. The current chaotic landscape is only temporary. A formalized circuit split guarantees that these cases will escalate to the United States Supreme Court. When they do, the core question before the justices will not be about border enforcement. The question is whether the executive branch has the power to unilaterally reinterpret and override established statutory law. The stakes are structural. A ruling in favor of the administration would grant unchecked domestic detention powers to the executive, rendering congressional oversight effectively obsolete. A ruling upholding the appellate courts forces the executive to govern strictly within the confines of laws written by Congress, limiting their logistical reach. This impending showdown will decide the future of the separation of powers and the long-term stability of the American legal system.